The waves are quite high, but they're relatively short-lived sometimes. And so, there's a normal level through there, but when you hit these spikes, you really want to be in the market and ready to capture them.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty in Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for June 24th through July 1st, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature Ital Preziosi Silver Kilo bars at just $1.79 over spot per ounce. We also have a highly limited supply of 1/10-ounce Platinum Britannia at $59 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.
Welcome back to Liberty in Finance. We're delighted to have this guest. Darren Gordon is a managing director of Centaurus Metals Limited. He joins us this Monday, June 10th, 2024. It's, I believe it's quite a bit later, actually tomorrow, where you are, Darren, in Australia. Welcome to Liberty in Finance.
Thanks, Donegan. Great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, you reminded me that we met last year at the Rural Symposium on Natural Resources Investing in Boca Raton, Florida. I was showing you my Boca Raton pen here to prove that we were both there together. And I was watching with great interest the pre-conference interview you did with Rick Rule. Our audience is very familiar with Rick Rule. He's on our channel about once a month, and he has been for about a decade, educating us on the importance of Bill, for one thing, being a contrarian, and second of all, owning real things. And that's why he's spent his lifelong passion of natural resource investing in real things and people who own real things and companies that bring real things forward to the market. So Centaurus Metals caught his eye, and that means we should pay attention because we've come to respect his judgment in things like this. One of the things that he explained and you have clarified in your interview with him was the nickel focus, producing from one of the largest nickel deposits in the world. And can we first talk with our audience briefly about why nickel is so important to the future of the economy, and why people need to position themselves as contrarians now when nickel may be on the unfavored recently by other jurisdictions, and why now might be the perfect time to find the value hidden in nickel?
Yeah, look, Donegan, I think nickel's always been a very important commodity for the globe. It's historically been used in stainless steel, which pretty much goes into all construction. But obviously, in more recent times, there's been this, new industry in what we call EVs and battery-related technologies, and nickel is central to a number of the battery chemistries that exist today. One of the really interesting attributes about nickel is that it actually allows these EVs to go further, to have higher densities in the batteries. And whilst you'll have various types of batteries, this chemistry of nickel, cobalt, manganese, NCM batteries is I guess the cornerstone of what the EV industry's been trying to build itself on. So Centaurus is a company that has a project in nickel in northern Brazil, and we're in the process of doing feasibility study work on that right now. And hopefully by the time we actually get to the Rural Conference in Boca Raton, that we'll have those feasibility study numbers released to the market. So for us, it's a really important time. We do feel like it is one of the sort of preeminent nickel deposits globally. And we can talk more specifically if your audience likes around the difference between laterites and sulfides. But needless to say, we have a nickel sulfide deposit, which historically has been what customers have been looking for, albeit the growth in the industry in recent times has come from lateritic sources, principally out of Indonesia. So we're sort of competing in these sort of different sort of markets, but nickel is it's fundamental to everything that we want to achieve if we want to get this EV rollout happening the way that it's been talked about in the broader market.
there's so many aspects of what you just talked about I think we need to dive into. First of all, our audience has paid attention to nickel in the past because there was a rather flamboyant blow up of the COMEX nickel market a couple of years ago where there was what looked like a complete short squeeze happening. Prices went through the roof. Contracts were canceled. Deals were rolled back, things like that. And it raised people's eyebrows of thinking, might this happen in other metals that we follow more closely on a weekly basis here, like silver, going forward? So that's been something that's been on a lot of people's minds. Another thing about nickel is, in the past, it has been a monetary metal in the U.S., but now it seems to be part of the new the future economy. In addition to the existing industrial demand, there's likely to be other sources of demand coming online. And in the face of that, there seem to be some jurisdictional pressures that are not favoring some of the existing operations, but it seems that your deposit is of such a scope and scale and in a jurisdiction that is favorable to you being able to move forward. So those things seem to bode well for the future of Centaurus. But Rick always reminds us to try to position ourselves as contrarians where there's, as he put it, he loves to be hated, meaning he loves to find things where the broader market has not yet recognized the unrealized value potential there, and to position himself at that time. And that's why he's looking closely at Centaurus right now. More than looking closely, he looked closely enough to go ahead and invest in it and to invite them to the conference. Can you talk to us about that, from that flare up, from that glorious flare up in the COMEX market a few years ago, where it seemed like nickel was going to go to the sky, that has been beaten down quite a bit recently, and it may be now a value play, whereas it wasn't perhaps just as recently as a few years ago.
Yeah, look, I think when you go back to what happened a few years ago, it was definitely a situation where there was some market participants, principally in Indonesia, that was, in effect shorting the nickel stocks. On the basis that they had a large portion of the supply and thought that they could manage that. And obviously, once people get wind of those situations, they put the squeeze on. But the reality was they got bailed out at that point in time. I guess since that point, the Indonesian nickel supply has continued in earnest. It's definitely created the negative sentiment towards nickel prices in more recent times. It's had a huge impact on nickel projects in Australia, in the sense of just that price coming to a level where Australian producers have not been able to compete. So I think there's two aspects to it. One is obviously there's a lot of supply out of Indonesia, and with that comes questions around where their power is coming from, where they're depositing tailings, use of water, cutting down of rainforests, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot to take in on that side of it. But then also they've been able to do this and be able to bring a lot to, the cost structures, where it's made it more difficult for some producers in higher cost jurisdictions to be able to compete. So for Centaurus operating in Brazil, we are fortunate that Brazil's grid power system is coming from hydro sources principally. So our carbon footprint with this project is going to be extremely low. I think we're talking at the mine site only sort of 1.5 tons of carbon per ton of nickel equivalent. So that's extremely low when you look at it on the nickel curve. With that, though, you also get relatively low power costs. So the important thing for us is that we need to be able to compete on cost with the Indonesian supply. And we think that we will be able to do that. We think that we'll be low quartile cost for our nickel when we release a feasibility study in a few weeks' time. And that's the other important aspect. It's all well and good to be able to say, okay, well, I can compete on the emission side of things and I've got everything favourable in that perspective. But if I can't compete on cost, then I don't have a business. So, I think when Rick looks at it, he's probably looking at it from a multitude of factors. And one is principally a cost basis, but also then there's some nice attributes about the Centaurus project that sort of can tackle that. And I always say that, we need to be able to compete on cost. But then once we've been able to compete on cost, then our emissions credentials are going to shoot the lights out because we're just so much more favourable relative to other jurisdictions.
Now, another aspect of competing on cost comes from the scope and scale, the magnitude of the deposit that Centaurus is developing. Can you let our audience know why, and Rick has talked to us about this in the past, but to underscore that for us, why it's so beneficial for potential investors to become owners of, through shareholding, of a company that has that scope of scale, both from a cost standpoint and a longevity of the resource, et cetera?
Yeah, so look, our resource in JORC terms is just under 1 million tonnes of contained nickel metal. And that's, as far as undeveloped nickel sulfide deposits goes, that's very, very large. There's probably only one or two other deposits that I would think compete with us as far as quality of deposit. Having that sort of resource enables us to look at a production profile which should be approaching 20,000 tonnes of nickel per year, and that is in sulfide terms probably putting you close to top 10 producers globally. So it has some significant scale to it. The other side about that is mine life. So we're going to have this mine life that will extend over a period of time. But I think one of the interesting things is when you look at nickel sulfide deposits, you can have these laterite deposits out of Indonesia, all going to be sort of shallow, open pittable, relatively low mining costs. And then you'll have higher grade underground deposits, which might have slightly higher costs. Centaurus is in this sort of situation where it's got a relatively high grade, but in an open pit deposit. So our mining is probably a little bit simpler than some deposits of nickel. So we're going to be starting our work at surface and then progressively going deeper into a pit before we think about having to go into the underground. But we're able to do that with size and scale and mine life on our side, which ultimately should lend itself to lower operating costs over the longer term.
And no doubt when you've looked at the multiples of earnings that the market has rewarded those top scale producers in the past, it's got to be exciting being in the development stages that you are, looking at the size of the potential for the resource, this deposit, and thinking, wow, if we do our work that's set before us correctly here, we could be enjoying those multiples of earnings, et cetera. The other thing about longevity of the life of the deposit is, as I understand it, your ongoing exploratory work that you were doing, the drilling that you were doing, even as recently as late last year, was showing great promise that the deposit may be larger than you've documented to date. So potential shareholders can realize that there may be even more to come from this deposit, and that you're even looking for additional other deposits. You have a new drilling program this year looking at, for other things as well. Correct.
Yeah. So look, I think we did about 50,000 metres of diamond core drilling in 2023, which hasn't made its way into the resource yet. And that's just a function of the feasibility study and the timing of that. So shortly after the feasibility comes out, we should be in a position to do a new resource update. A lot of that drilling that we did last year was at depth. So, we've already defined very large project in the open pits. And then, we've got these sort of vertical ore bodies. And so we've been drilling underneath it, still hitting mineralization. So know that nickel is there. We're very confident that at some point in time in the future, we will have underground operations here as well, but we just don't have to chase that now. We don't have to do expensive drilling trying to prove up that part of the deposit to make our project work. We've got a very, very good project just on the fact of what we're starting with in the open pits. We have an exploration program ongoing now also in the northern part of Brazil in the Carajás mineral province, so very prolific mineral belt. Some of your other listeners may have seen more recently a company called Bravo had hit some very interesting copper intersections. And I think they released another result yesterday. Again, still making new discoveries, and this project's not too far from where we are. So we've started drilling for this copper project. We've got a 3,000 metre drill program underway right now, and obviously we'll have to wait and see what the results deliver for us. But we're very focused on Brazil. We're very focused on creating a pipeline of opportunity leveraging off our skills in country to find new projects. So, Jaguar is exceptional. We're hopeful that this copper project called Boy Nova that we've got will prove up to be something of significance, but the drilling is going to tell us the answer to that. But we are in the right part of the world as far as exploration potential. There's just massive deposits in the Carajás. A lot of them owned by Vale, been there for 50 years. So we feel like it's a great address, but just got to go off and do the work.
You mentioned being the right part of the world geologically for the deposits. What about being in the right part of the world for a friendly climate with the right infrastructure that you need? I think you mentioned hydropower is a big win for two reasons: the environmental, a low carbon footprint, and low cost as well, and no risk to foreign supplies of petroleum being cut off or something like that that's going to threaten your power. You've got a steady, reliable, dependable source of power. Anything else? Because there's a lot of concern since all the lockdowns and everything, that supply chain disruptions that happened over the past 4 years. A lot of companies realized, and it became embarrassingly obvious to their investors, how vulnerable they were to extended supply chains or unfriendly jurisdictions and that sort of thing. There's been tensions, geopolitical tensions growing, sides being taken as far as making sure that countries are securing access to strategic materials before the lines get even less friendly going forward. Can you talk to us about why this jurisdiction and an Australian-based company are especially attractive to Western investors?
Yeah, look, I guess obviously Centaurus Metals as an ASX-listed company, allows investors to be able to invest in a structure with confidence. I think the ASX has probably been one of the best performing markets for commodity type stories over a long period of time. We've been operating in Brazil for 15 years. We sort of know the ropes with what we're doing there. And I think with that in the Carajás itself, yes, you talk about the power and, yes, low cost. By the time we're in production, we'll probably be 100% renewably sourced power. But because Vale has sort of developed this region for the last 50 years, you've got high voltage power, you've got, labour base that's probably second, third generation people who have worked in mining, whether they be geologists, whether they be mining engineers, construction guys. The centre of the Carajás is a city called Parauapebas, and that's about 250,000 people. There's a whole lot of mining service providers that are based there. Look, if you had a major disruption globally, well, there's still going to be issues of getting things in and out. But I think Brazil's been very good at manufacturing a lot of its own requirements. It's a big economy, and it's also, in some ways, not played sides so much. So, I think it's got the ability to sort of sit in the middle, trying to be a little bit neutral in the way that it thinks about things. So I think a combination of factors there is making Brazil an attractive investment destination for a project. And then you overlay that with the fact that Centaurus is operating there as an ASX-listed company, and I think you've got a very safe environment for people to invest.
On a personal anecdote, my wife and I and our two youngest sons went on a study trip to South Dakota, to the Black Hills, which is a historical gold-bearing region, about a decade ago, a little bit more. And we toured an area where the gold price was so beaten down that some of the mines had been just mothballed, ceased operation, that sort of thing. And it didn't make a light bulb go off in this head at the time that might be a value opportunity to start nibbling at some of those opportunity prospects that would be taking advantage of the potential recovery of that area. And so you've got, I understand in Australia, you mentioned in passing that this cost competitive environment with nickel recently has beaten down some other competitors in Australia, for example, that have basically stopped their operations. And yet you're striving to prove that that Centaurus can be cost competitive even with the Asian competition that you've got coming out of Indonesia. And it sounds like this may be setting itself up for a time when value investors may be well to pay close attention to those companies like Centaurus that are positioning themselves to come out very strongly out of this environment as the demand for nickel increases. And as you're able to hold your cost structure down, the potential profitability picture there could be very attractive for investors who are willing to take that step and get in line, as Rick Will has always told us as contrarians to do before the crowd realizes the opportunity.
Yeah, no, look, I think that's definitely true. Like we feel like we're in a situation where we will be able to compete where others may not at current price levels. We do expect that nickel prices recover, that, the supply out of Indonesia settles down. And so you really do need to be positioning yourself into nickel stories right now. And you've seen more recently, copper's had very good runs, and nickel probably hasn't really followed. One interesting thing, when you see the nickel price curve, it can move quite dramatically quite quickly. And so you do want to be in production when those spikes come, because you can make exceptional money during that period of time. And that's, a focus for us, is that the waves are quite high, but they're relatively short-lived sometimes. And so, there's a normal level through there, but when you hit these spikes, you really want to be in the market and ready to capture them. So that's sort of an underlying tone that we want to get to. We want to get this project up and running and in production as quickly as we can, so that we can capture some of that really nice win, because these spikes, they do come, and we've got to be ready and set to go for them.
Oh, great. Well, everyone watching this video, you've been warned. Rick's told us for the last 10 years, look for opportunities. He's found one for us. So look in the description of this video. You'll find information on Centaurus. It's the corporate webpage, their stock information. And Darren, if people want to reach out directly to Centaurus with questions, how should they do so?
Yeah, look, probably the best bit is through my email, darren.gordon@centaurus.com.au, or they can ring our office, or talk to our people here in the office in Australia. I think the details are there on the webpage.
Excellent. Well, we've been speaking with Darren Gordon, the Managing Director of Centaurus Metals Limited. Darren, thank you for joining us this time on Liberty and Finance.
Great to be here. Appreciate it. Thank you.
This is Kaiser Johnson with Liberty and Finance, and these are the Miles Franklin Weekly Specials for June 24th through July 1st, 2024, while supplies last. First, we feature Ital Preziosi silver kilo bars at just $1.79 over spot per ounce. We also have a highly limited supply of 1/10-ounce Platinum Britannia at $59 over melt. To order our specials or any of the many other options we have available, call us at 1-888-81-LIBERTY. That's 1-888-815-4237. We're available after hours and on weekends, and we look forward to speaking with you.